Okay, it's the final push. And the first talk is by Richard Pywell with Nick Isaac, Tom Oliver and David Roy, and is entitled Using Biological Records to Address Environmental Challenges. Richard.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you for inviting me to speak at the NBN Conference. Yes, I'd just like to acknowledge my co-authors, or blame them depending on how well the talk goes. So that's Nick, Tom and David. David's in the audience. So I'd like to start with the challenge, which you've heard something about today. So several speakers have mentioned, how species and ecosystems are increasingly threatened by man-made pressures and drivers, sort of causing reductions in biodiversity and degradation. And policymakers need firm evidence to help them make decisions on environmental protection, mitigation measures, and the regulation and use of resources. But the big problem is, the challenge, if you like, is that there's less money around to do this. So the theme of my talk is can biological recording by volunteers deliver data which is actually useful for this evidence base in a cost-effective manner. So I'd just like to step back firstly and talk a little bit about the pros and cons of biological recording data. And as I'm the last speaker, some of this has been said before. That's unfortunately one of the problems of being last. But basically, in terms of the positives, yes, the biological recording data can give us very broad taxonomic scope, and it includes not just the sort of cuddly nice species, it includes some sort of non-charismatic species, but that do some important things for ecosystem services. It includes a wide geographic coverage across gradients of land use intensity, allows us to detect some diffuse effects both in the short and over long periods of time, because we've got such a fantastic history of biological recording going back centuries. It provides us with early warning and a long-term perspective. And importantly, it provides an opportunity to engage with the next generation of biological recorders, the idea of citizen science and training people to record biology. So they're the pros. In terms of the disadvantages, this has been mentioned, ad hoc recording has got some serious biases with it in terms of time, space, detectability, and the actual effort of recording, the bias in spatial recording effort to one particular site. But, and this is what I'm going to talk about today, in recent years we've made, I say we, David, Tom and others, have made some serious inroads by developing new statistical approaches to take account of some of these biases. So I'd just like to structure my talk by pointing you to this excellent publication, which is the BRC 50th anniversary brochure. And after you've downloaded or bought Dave's book for Christmas, you may wish to go to this website because it's free to download the brochure. And it just gives you, it gives me a very useful structure to center my talk around and to show you examples of how we can apply biological recording data. Now, I'm not going to get time to talk about everything. I'm going to focus on talking about red listing and indicators, climate change, invasion biology, and some plant-insect interactions. So we'll start with some red listing and indicators. Now, these are very central to the UK government's response to biological targets, the CBD's targets, the strategic plan for biodiversity. And really, volunteer recording and volunteer collected data has a very major role in the development of these 25 or so indicators, and this is going to be increasingly the case. And I'll just highlight, for those perhaps you can't see at the back, that really volunteer collected data makes a major contribution, particularly to the indicators around the status of threatened species. And you can see that in the period 70 to 2010 and then 2005 to 2010, in terms of measuring progress, the threatened species, according to volunteer collected data, are doing badly. So that's going to inform policy, hopefully, to change this around. So in terms of trends in indicators, these are the classic trends that we've had for many years, based on our long-term population abundance monitoring from 1970 to 2010, particularly for birds, mammals, butterflies and moths. This is out. These are the long-term recording schemes, butterfly monitoring scheme and the Rothamsted moth traps, for example. But recently we've developed similar indices based on just occurrence data from volunteer collected data sources. And this really allows us to expand the scope of the taxa that we're looking at for the indicators to a broader range of bees, wasps and ants, 62, more moths that are not necessarily recorded well in the moth traps, and other insects which are fulfilling important roles for ecosystem services. So we're expanding the scope by bringing this in. And it's also informed some high-level publications, such as the recent paper that Nick Isaac featured in terms of the defaunation review. And this, the box A here is really using these volunteer-collected indicators to look at different sort of the fate of different taxa in terms of decreasing or increasing trends across these taxa. So if we move on now to talk about climate change impacts. Now this, the first slide I'm going to show you has been shown quite a few times before in talks in the past, but it's a nice summary from Rachel Hickling's work using analysis of the Atlas data to show the general northward shift of many taxonomic groups between 1960 and 2000. As a result, we think of global warming. So virtually every taxa except reptiles seem to be having this shift further north. And yes, you've seen this slide before, except I've put the butterfly conservation logo in the bottom corner this time. So this is an excellent example, Chris, of the northward shift based on Atlas data. And so yes, it's so good we're going to show it twice, but no, it just shows you the value of the atlases, the two atlases showing this this northward shift. But to put some fresher data up as well, my colleague Tom Oliver has been doing some work modelling future climate or future distributions of bumblebee species under climate change scenarios. This is the maps for and the projections for Bombus ruderareus, a rare bumblebee. This is the historic range, so it's a southeasterly species. And if we put the 60 to 100 year climate change scenario model into this, the distribution shifts much further north. And if we take the two away, you can see that actually it's moving north in the country, but it's actually disappearing from the historic ranges in the southeast. So but it is able to move north. And if we use a slightly different approach, this is occupancy modelling, which Nick Isaac is currently doing, you can see actually that in the case of ruderareus, this species, it seems to be very much anchored, the strong population seems to correspond very much to the areas of unimproved grasslands in the southeast. Whereas if we look at occupancy models for a more northerly species, Bombus bohemicus, you can see actually that this species is showing some detrimental effects of climate change because simply it can't move any further north, and this is similar to the example Dave gave earlier. So if we look across the sort of risks and opportunities for all the different taxa in terms of climate change, and this was put into a recent report, you can see that some species like the bryophytes tend to do worse. So red is decline, and whereas the benefits tend to be the blue and purpley colours. So bryophytes overall generally do worse in the risk opportunity analysis or overview of climate change impacts. Whereas the bees and the hoverflies, it's a much more of a mixed bag, with some species doing badly, but generally others doing quite well out of climate change. So as I say, it's important to look at these things in the round. So if I move on to the third strand of my talk, which is biological invasions. And here we can see that this is the historic perspective based on volunteer recording of the arrival of non-native invasive species into the UK from the 1500s, and you can see an exponential rise of these species with time. But more worryingly, the negative ecological impact of these species is also beginning to rise from the turn of the last century onwards. So this is beginning to impinge on some important ecosystem functions and processes. And a very good example of the volunteer collected data and how we can use this to understand the impacts of invasion on native species is the ladybird story. This is Helen Roy's work with Nick Isaac. And this diagram shows the decline of the native ladybird, the two-spot ladybird here, following the arrival of the harlequin ladybird. And here we're using population data from Belgium and Britain. So Britain is the black line, where the two-spot is generally trending upwards without the harlequin, and in Belgium it's generally trending downwards without the harlequin. But when the harlequin arrives, you can see that in the case of the decline, it's exacerbated, and the positive trend in the UK has turned to a negative trend. So this is very, very useful evidence, in fact some of the first evidence, we believe, of the impact of non-native species in the UK on our native fauna. Also, a further key role for the volunteer community is using the new technology, the new recording apps and alert systems, so that we can track the invasion of new species as they arrive, like the quagga mussel arriving, and we can see how quickly it's moving across the country. And this will enable action plans to be put in place to control these species if it's deemed necessary. So the final part of my talk is just a very brief section on insect-plant interactions and the role of volunteer collected data. And here I'll use the example of some of my own work, actually, in this case, where we're looking at the potential deficits in pest control and pollination service based on the Biological Record Centre data and the Bee Wars data for key functional species. In this case, we've taken ground beetles, and the ground beetles responsible for pest control in crops, in arable crops. And in terms of crop pollination, we've subsetted the pollinators for just those species which we find in insect-pollinated crops in the UK. And what we've done is looked at both the species richness of these important functional species at the 10-kilometre scale square, and the functional diversity of these species. And the key thing is that functional diversity, the resilience, if you like, of these important functions that these species give to the ecosystem, appears to be lowest in the areas where we tend to grow most of our arable crops. So although there isn't necessarily a problem now, it is pointing in the direction that we perhaps need to take some measures to maybe increase the functional diversity of these key groups in these important regions, if that's where we want to target our agri-environment schemes, for example, to mitigate this risk. So in terms of conclusion, well, I think absolutely biological records collected by volunteers are incredibly valuable as a resource for researchers. The research community does demand, or is demanding, more and more of the data, but hopefully the statistical developments, the model developments can keep pace with this demand, and we're able to sort of account for the biases in the data. But I think looking to the future, we also need to consider closer collaboration between the research community and the recording schemes and the recording community. And we need to integrate both the ad hoc recording with more structured monitoring and even large-scale biological experiments. I think we need to bring it all together to address the challenges. It's not just one size fits all. And I'll end with an example of perhaps where we're going with that. And this is the recent DEFRA-funded National Pollinator and Pollination Monitoring feasibility study, which is central to the DEFRA's National Pollinator Strategy for England and Wales. And this is basically to develop and test a sustainable monitoring framework for pollinators and the pollination service that can be implemented both by volunteers and paid recorders, if you like. And it involves a consortium of both recording schemes, conservation agencies, universities, and it's led by CEH, so it's coordinated, hopefully, by Biological Record Centre. And just to show you the framework of what it's trying to achieve, these are all the things that we think we need to know about pollinators and the pollination service, whether it be just the overall abundance, or whether we need to know the crop pollination service, or we need to know something of species richness. So there's a whole range of things that we actually need to know about these pollinators. And this is really how we believe the different strands of recording might fit in, thanks Mike, to to actually answer those questions. So, we believe there's certainly a role for citizen science in participatory monitoring, looking at just overall pollinator abundance, so citizen science. We believe certainly there's a strong role for biological recording with BWARs, BRC and the like, looking at species richness. And then we believe there's also a role for more standardized monitoring approaches, the sorts of pan-trap approaches that Dave was mentioning, and the trap plant, the crop plants where you're looking at the pollination service as well. So I think there's a role for all of these approaches in achieving what we need for this monitoring network. So I'd like to finish by acknowledging all the volunteer recorders and recording schemes, and thank you very much.
We've got time for one or two questions. Anything? No? Yes.
We heard from the chief scientist this morning about all the investment in, I suppose, Earth observation. And later in the day we heard about an exciting project with the Natural History Museum about how the future generation of taxonomists are going to be largely provided through lottery funding. What do you think, what way might there be sufficient resources given to providing necessary skills for recorders for satisfying the systems you were talking about there, particularly in regard to identifying all those species from your pan traps, for example?
Yeah, I think firstly there needs to be funding for the infrastructure to support the schemes in society, or continued funding. I think technology is moving on a pace, and I think the more we can do to support people doing the recording, the better. I think there's probably a role for technological developments. I mean, we heard a bit about eDNA as an approach, which may be a quicker way, a barcoding approach for to process some of these samples, potentially. And I think there is a role for DEFRA and other organisations to fund some, sort of possibly support volunteer recording as well for the more demanding aspects that we're talking about, the more taxonomically demanding recording, where we're asking people to go to places they wouldn't necessarily want to go to get coverage. So I think there's sort of multiple funding strands that need to be considered and areas that need to be funded. I hope I've answered the question.
Time for one more. Jim.
This whole business about pollinators, I'm fortunate enough to have read Dave Goulson's book, so I'm not really speaking from a deep knowledge of it, but nevertheless, I was struck by the whole complexity of the issue, with long tongue, short tongue bumblebees, how little we knew about their basic biology, and so on and so forth. So it seems to me that someone needs to draw up a checklist and identify clearly who's doing what, because it seems to me there's a lot needs to be done. In some areas, quite fundamental research, and some of that quite fundamental research needs to be perhaps tied in to recording schemes and so on and so forth. So I welcome what you've put up as a kind of a wish list, but it seems to me someone needs to go beyond that and think this thing through in detail, because I have a fear that the messages that are coming out are just a wee bit too simplistic.
Yeah, as part of the DEFRA-funded feasibility study, Mark Stevenson, he's in the audience, may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that part of the first step is to do a major review of what people are actually doing in terms of recording and what might be useful to try and understand how it fits into answering those questions, if you like. And so I think that they're intending to do that, Jim, and actually to provide some assessment, I suspect, of its cost benefit as well. And that will include everything ranging from, the kind of high cost, potentially, approaches to very simplistic, participatory monitoring at the sort of coarse taxonomic level.
Okay, thanks very much, Richard. Okay, when John Sawyer joined the NBN as CEO earlier in the year, the first task that faced him really was looking at the whole direction of travel of the NBN and looking at how we should refresh our strategy and that kind of thinking. And we are lucky now that he can tell us what he's found out. John.
Right, thank you very much, and what a fantastic day we've had. A network wouldn't be a network without you all in the room, so I really appreciate you coming here. I've been in the job for about 26 weeks, and from this talk you'll see that I need to thank an awful lot of people. I won't thank them personally, but you'll see all the things you've told me over the last 26 weeks appearing on the slides in front of you. I'm here to talk to you about the power of the National Biodiversity Network as a partnership. And I'm hopefully going to convince you that we together can deliver this strategy, that we're uniquely placed to drive up the value of what we offer in the United Kingdom. I thought, since I'm back in the UK, having lived in New Zealand for 20 years, I thought I should quote David Attenborough: "No one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced." The importance of experiencing nature should not be understated, and I think that's where we come in. That's exactly what we're all about. Our new NBN strategy begins very personally for all of us, I believe. We have a learning pathway that led us to here, to biological recording, to caring about nature, and to wanting to understand more through research. This is a painting of my house on the west coast of Scotland on the Isle of Mull, black basalt terrace. This is where my life changed and where my learning began. This is where I was introduced to invasive species, to overgrazing, to deforestation, to the impacts of climate change, and this is where I was introduced to the idea of recording and documenting wildlife. So, what do I want to talk about this afternoon? Well, 4 things. I want to talk about the need for us to change as a network. I want to talk about a new network vision. I want to talk about us as a family. It's come up today already. And I want to talk about the new strategic direction. So, and first of all, there is a need for change. Hopefully you can all see it from what's been talked about today. The NBN's been on an amazing journey, but there are a few alternative futures appearing ahead, some of which won't be as good for us unless we adapt our strategy. We cannot continue as we are. Why do we need to change? Well, for a start, the loss of biodiversity should be enough motivation. Achim Steiner, the head of the United Nations Environment Programme, said a couple of years ago, "We haven't even begun to understand the damage we're bringing to bear on the sustainability of the planet." Other terms I've heard in the last few months are death by 1,000 cuts, shifting baselines, acceptance as the 5th stage in our grieving process about nature. Well, I think that's a critical thing for us to take on board. A second driver is that our data has immense power, and that power is not being fully realised at present. Every record we make, every polygon we draw, every database we build should contribute to each and every one of these uses, from understanding pollination services to managing invasive species to planning decisions nationwide. We're not adding enough value to the data that we're collecting. Knowing the distribution of a bird is just not enough. We need to embed that information in an ecological context, which will add power to what we're doing. Of course, generational changes is another driver for us to change. The demographics of recording are changing. Disruptive technology is allowing anybody to participate. Can we evolve to make use of this energy and this volunteerism? We must also change, I believe, to support government. Small governments need big communities, and that's us. The 5th aim of the National Pollinator Strategy is to improve evidence on the status of pollinators and the services they provide. So the development of a sustainable long-term pollinator monitoring program needs us again, as we've just been hearing about. We also need to change to counter what we in the NBN are calling data deficit disorder. We've created a system with a range of issues, from taxonomic to geographic to access and resolution. And there are 4 key components to capturing and mobilising data, and we are failing on all of them. In terms of visibility of our data, 30 million records or more on the NBN gateway cannot currently be viewed by the public or by you. In terms of accuracy, 50% of the data we store, we're not even sure of the accuracy of it. In terms of accessibility, we've set up very complicated systems to make it very hard to access data, and we don't even allow the data that we provide to be used immediately for research. In terms of resolution, only 12 million records on the NBN gateway are available at full capture resolution. So some significant challenges there. We also have a taxonomic deficit. Of the 78,000 plus taxa on the NBN gateway, only 6,391 of them have more than 1,000 records. So our knowledge of biodiversity is actually very skewed. In fact, 37%, 29,000 plus species have no data. So there are plenty of gaps for us as a community to plug. We also have geographic gaps in that recordings not even across the United Kingdom. SK49 is in Rotherham, and NB33 is just west of Stornoway on the Isle of Lewis. There's a very great disparity in our coverage across the United Kingdom. And there are geographic problems at a taxonomic level, with the Highland midge only ever having been recorded fewer than 20 times in Scotland. There are more records in England. And someone suggested to me that maybe just the Scots are tougher, so they don't notice them. So, curiously, the earthworm has not been recorded north of Edinburgh, which the Earthworm Society has just signed up to be a data provider, so I'm sure that's going to change. I hope so. Finally, I'd like to suggest we have a high-risk funding arrangement for the NBN family. There is a need for us to broaden that to make it more sustainable. We're also creating inefficiency through duplication. Those images on the right-hand side of the screen are all separate portals being developed independently in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland for environment and biodiversity. We need to work together to collaborate to remove wasted effort, and that's where the NBN comes in. We also have an open data movement sweeping around the world. We've heard about it today. We're being actually left behind by large numbers of people around the world. It's also becoming unethical not to share data with the public. And in fact, in the UK, invisible data is causing environmental problems. We have a small database of situations where that's occurring. Finally, as Ian Boyd said this morning, we need to change to integrate our data with Earth observation systems that are coming online. So I think you'll understand the need to change. There are plenty more reasons, but I'll move on. But change is all very well, but we need to know where we're going. So now I want to focus a little bit on our vision as an NBN. Can you imagine an equivalent vision for our team to the bold vision of Rosetta? The idea of landing a spaceship the size of a washing machine on a comet that's 4 kilometers in diameter, traveling at 135,000 kilometers an hour. That fills most of us with awe, and it really is rocket science. But so what is our Rosetta? And our current vision is to make data freely and easily available to everybody. And that's one scenario. An alternative is that, well, is that good enough? Is that 135,000 kilometre an hour vision? Or is it to embed ourselves, our data and knowledge creation at the heart of UK biodiversity learning and environmental decision making? Or is it somewhere in between? Or is it something entirely different? I think our future vision needs to take a leaf out of Professor John Lawton's book and turn our focus to more, bigger, better, joined data. What do these terms mean for us? Well, more means better coverage, more taxa, it means ecosystems and habitats being covered. Bigger means more powerful attributes, metadata, greater capacity to filter and analyze. Better means more accurate data, more understanding of the negative records and the search effort, greater structure to our data. And joined means connected, not just within ourselves, but also with everyone else, from geological to economic data to climate data. Our future must embed more bigger, better and joined data as part of our future vision. I now want to talk about the NBN family. If we're going to have a network strategy, first of all, we need a network. To be a successful network, we must behave like a team. Often I see in the UK a loose, drifting aggregation of organisations struggling to survive, often actively competing. We're almost a coalition of the unwilling. And I think you can take a leaf out of the New Zealand book. In Māori culture, there's a word called whānau. meaning family. This is at the heart of the All Blacks culture, the New Zealand rugby team. They are the great, I don't need to rub it in, but they are the greatest sports team in the history of all codes of all sport in the history of the planet Earth. And they're as far as we're aware, they rely on the values of family as a core principle of their success. And I think we can learn from that. Family means working together. It means supporting each other. It means collaboration. It means success and sharing that success. But our family is made up of all sorts of elements. Some are brothers and sisters, some are aunties and uncles, some are second cousins. And the most important box in there is the middle one, which is you. You are the NBN family. That's why you're here. That's why you've spent today discussing biodiversity and the network. But how does that family work together? This is a hierarchy of working together, of how we might work together. There are some people currently and organisations that are currently coexisting with us. They're aware of the NBN, but there's no dependency. Others are networking. They have informal discussions with us, but that's it. Then comes cooperation. They have common issues and some synergy, but that's as far as it goes. Then comes collaboration. We move on to some shared actions, some shared decision making. And finally, we arrive at partnership, a codified relationship with a shared vision and the ownership of our collective outcomes. I'd like to move us towards that partnership, but that's going to take compromise, it's going to take greater collaboration. And it will mean commitment from all of you to implementing the NBN strategy. Our family is already working together in some ways, though. I think this slide from Jonathan Silvertown illustrates it. This comes from analysis of observations and identifiers on the iSpot system. The blue dots are the observations and the red dots are the identifiers. We are already heavily connected as a family in so many ways. Surely we can build on that extraordinary capability that things like iSpot provide in terms of generating network support. I believe there's a network pathway for the NBN. It's illustrated here as an NBN commitment curve. I hope many of you are already on this curve, taking a journey of commitment to a collective vision bigger than your own. It often starts with people using the NBN gateway. You may sign up to the e-newsletter, you may attend a workshop, you may put your data on the gateway, you may make your data visible on the gateway. You may then create a partnership with other members. You may then make your data fully open on the gateway. You may start sponsoring the network, which you're very welcome to do. And the commitment curve that I'm showing here is a journey that I think we need to lead people through. It's a pathway, a learning pathway for all of us about how we might work together in partnership. So now I want to talk about the new strategic direction for the NBN. We've asked all of you what you think, and thank you for all your willingness to engage with us, our questionnaires, our workshops. We've travelled over 40,000 miles to listen to you all over the last 6 months. Without that, we would not been able to have developed a new strategy. But now it's our turn to try and make head or tail of it, which is very difficult. No, I'm joking. So I'm making the assumption that we want to share data because we believe it's in the best interests of the natural world. My colleague, Alan Saunders, who lives and works in New Zealand, and I met him when I started work at the New Zealand Department of Conservation, he said, always ask, how will this benefit nature? And I think it's important for us to think about that as we develop and implement an NBN strategy. But before we start changing the world, I think we need to start by changing ourselves. In the 6 months of doing this job, I've been asked by approximately 50 people, what's the NBN going to do for me? And fewer than 5 people have asked, what can I do for the NBN? So for that reason, I think we need to change our language from you to we. But we also need to change from casual to systematic in terms of how we capture our data. We need to shift from cursory to trusted, from closed to open data. That will take us from being discretionary, where our data may or may not be used, to critical. I also think we need to shift from thinking about data to thinking about outcomes. What are we trying to achieve? And from entrenchment to evolution, and from following to leading. And I'm talking here about an NBN revolution. And I believe there are 5 fundamental pillars of the NBN strategy: vision, ambition, stakeholder support, innovation, action, and review. But what does ambition look like? George Monbiot, in October last year, he asked, why are Britain's conservation groups so lacking in ambition? Does our ambition mean an all-taxer with full coverage in real time? Does it mean for the NBN that we would have complete understanding of all UK ecological systems? Does it mean full open data in perpetuity? Does it mean no decision can be made without the information that we're gathering and collecting? And does it mean that we would have a true partnership? And what does innovation look like? Is it using Tom August's fantastic new Nature Near Me tool on Twitter, where you can find directions to wildlife near you, you can download distribution maps? Have a play, it's a lot of fun. Or is it the innovative way that you can use iSpot to crowdsource species identifications? 93% of observations on iSpot are first identified within 7 days. That's a phenomenal, innovative way to crowdsource information. Or is it the fantastic bird track system for recording and monitoring birds? And also, of course, even the NBN is innovative. Many countries around the world, in fact, most countries don't have an NBN. We, as a team now, have settled on 5 strategic aims, and I think there's general support that we should focus on capturing and mobilizing data, the use of data, engaging people about nature, or more specifically about wildlife recording and the value of our data, and an aim on our infrastructure, and an aim focused on supporting us as a network to keep working as a network. Some of the key messages we've heard in the last 6 months are summarised here, and I believe these could all be commitments we all make as members to a new implementation of an NBN strategy. Practically everyone I've spoken to wants faster data flow. They want quality data to use and to motivate people. There appears to be a desire to open up certain types of data, especially for invasive species, and perhaps even for records that are older than 20 years. Why not? There's also a desire to make our data interoperable. Similarly, we're hearing of a commitment to evaluating our own data maturity. Are we doing as good a job as we think we are? And to improve the functionality of our data recording systems, and to meet data standards and to work together to systematically plug gaps that exist. Can we make these policy commitments to the NBN? To diversify data capture, we've been working with the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management to develop a portal for ecological consultants to share their ecological and biodiversity data. And this is what it looks like. You may have had a play out at lunchtime. We're going to be working over the next few months with Sawyer to release this new system, to engage consultants, to make it more data available. This is just part of what a new data capture strategy will look like for the NBN, and there are other elements to it which I can elaborate on if you're interested. The strategy of improving the quality of our data will mean building a strong verification network. We must ensure this team is supported with systems and trained to support skills, to improve their skills and to improve capacity. The smaller this team is, the flakier our whole strategy becomes. We also need to develop a national online recording strategy to ensure all data flows and verification systems are working as fast and as accurately as possible. And you've seen this slide before, and I've said it before, but we are uniquely placed to capitalise on the new opportunities to drive up the value of our collective NBN work. Our work to learn and understand UK biodiversity should contribute to all these different uses. That's why we need to develop biodiversity data services that will ensure we are valued and a critical part of the UK biodiversity work programme. The government's natural environment white paper in 2011 included a goal to be the first generation to improve the natural environment. How can that happen without our network being heavily involved in demonstrating that improvement and delivering these services? We've also heard of the need to create a great customer experience across the wide network, all network channels. That means creating a stable and usable interface meeting all customer needs. Thank you. This is the design recommendation for a new interface for the NBN Gateway. We're going to investigate how to improve the stability of this system and to maximise the value of a gateway for NBN members and for all our users. Maybe following these kind of style guide, this type of style guide that we've investigated yesterday in our workshops. We're also redesigning how we deliver the taxonomic information, to include maps, to include images, to include linkages and options for people to explore, learn and connect with our NBN members. This is a new way of looking at how we might deliver information, and we see this as a strategic way to engage and to secure long-term support, as well as generating much more interest in you as a collective network. All through this strategic work is the need to build capacity to support the programme. And to do this, we need to promote the power of the recorder, to support and motivate and invest in them. We need to teach and mentor them and mobilise new demographics, new cohorts of healthy retirees and technologically savvy children. One initiative to achieve this is the collaborative project that you heard about this morning with Natural History Museum and the Field Studies Council to train the trainers. And there's plenty more we need to do in that space. A critical part of the NBN strategy is this team of amazing people with whom I've had the privilege of working with over the last 6 months. These people are working extraordinarily hard to help and support you in your work. So I'd like you all to give them a big round of applause for their work producing this conference and for their work with the network. Finally, I suggest that you should ask not what the NBN will do for you, but what we together can do for the NBN. I'm not expecting you to shoot me from a grassy knoll covered in meadow brown and all that stuff. But if we are going to collaborate, let's start now. 1 month ago, Jonathan Silvertown sent me a paper by Serrano et al. Entitled "It's Good to Share: Why Environmental Scientist Ethics Are Out of Date." It was published in Bioscience. When talking about the data we collect, they said, if environmental science is to be truly inclusive, including diverse groups of people at the tables of research, decision-making, policy and public debate, it's not only necessary to share, it's ethically obligatory. So in conclusion, I believe we need to acknowledge the need that we must change as a network. We must commit to the NBN family. We must set a strategic direction that's ambitious and innovative. And we must embed ourselves and our data and our knowledge creation at the heart of the United Kingdom's biodiversity learning and environmental decision making. Our draft strategy will be out and available for comment from you all in January, I hope. So we'll be working over the next month or the next 6 to 8 weeks to get you a draft so you can comment on it. I believe that with a data-driven partnership and a new strategy, we will be able to demonstrate the power of our collective work. So thank you very much.
We could have quite a long discussion after that, but I think we better restrict it if there is 1 or 2 questions.
That's good.
I don't think I'm going to need it. So that was great. That was good and set out. Very, very directed at the UK, obviously, but quite a lot of what we're involved with is stuff that might come into the UK from continental Europe. Now, I was just wondering about the interaction of the NBN family and NBN with whatever's happening in wider Europe.
That's a good question. We have met with LifeWatch in Sweden, and they've got a partnership across northern Sweden. We're meeting with our Irish counterparts in 2 weeks' time to talk about collaboration. We believe if we design our information distribution systems in the same way that the Atlas of Australia provides web services, we can deliver multiple spatial scales of data. So that could involve GBIF-like style distribution information across a wider area than just the UK, which would be quite a powerful way of interfacing with invasive species data, etc. So I think there are solutions out there, and maybe that we just need a strong partnership with GBIF so that we can make use of their information platform in whatever spatial scale we're interested in. But we'd need to have expertise from the network to decide how to do that, and I think that, we need to go there. Yeah.
We can have 1 more question. If not, thank you very much,
Thank
John.
you.
Good. Well, today seems to have flown by, and I hope you'll agree with me that we've had a very interesting range of speakers. that have given us all sorts of food for thought. And so my first task is let us all thank them very much for their contributions. I mentioned the sponsors this morning, but I would like to just once again thank them because it's made a real difference to us, and particularly to CEH and say it again? Habitat Aid. Thank you. Yes, let's thank them again too. I'm spared the task of concisely summarizing what's gone on today because Rachel Stroud has been scribbling away during the course of the meeting, and she's going to try by next Wednesday to have something prepared for our e-news. So please do look out for that when it comes out on Wednesday. You'll be able to get it via our website. In the back of the folders here that you've all got is, if I can find it, is a oh, just found it there. On this page here is a thing saying we'd really appreciate your feedback on this year's NBN conference, which you can do online, as it says there, or it's got one of those scanning barcode things that you can use. So please do give us your feedback. The feedback you gave us last year was really very helpful in the way we structured this year. So we do need to know both good and bad that you've had. And that brings us to the end. I think the last thing I'd just like to say is thank you very much again for coming, and please have a very safe journey home. Thank you.